Part 5, 8.9.2, part 5, and then we're done. Okay, so right now we're going to be looking at how to put these graphs, into an equation like this. So if I give you a graph, how can you write down the rule? How can you write the equation? So I'm going to shrink this up a little bit. So we have this graph right here, okay? And we want to know, how did we get this? So let's walk through the steps. There's about 4 of them. Okay, so let g of x equals a times b to the power of x plus k. Okay. First, we need to find the value of k. And since this graph has the line y1 as the asymptote, so that's the line that that this graph comes close to but never touches. There's a vertical translation of the parent function. So we moved the parent function up 1, right? And that's how we get the value of k. So k here is going to equal 1. So if we started with our parent function, then we would need to add 1 in order to translate it off of the x-axis and up 1. Okay? Does that make sense? In other words, if I just had my parent function, let's figure out what that parent function is, b of x. In order to get it off of this x-axis, because b of x would be right here, in order to get off of that, we need to translate it up 1, and that's where our value of k is. Okay? Now we need to find the value of a. So step 1 is find the value of k. That's what we're adding to this. But let's see, what are we multiplying? What factor are we transforming b by? Okay, so I'm going to scroll up. I'll be moving up and down, so don't get too hung up on where everything is. Okay, so k is 1. Find the value of a. The y-intercept of the graph is, so if we look here, I'm just going to keep it down and just work my way down here. Our y-intercept is right here at 3, right? The graph of g of x is translated, so this function is translated, so the x-axis is the asymptote. So when we had our parent function, we had to move it up here. That's where we got that k, right? Well, we're going to translate this, so the x-axis is the asymptote, the new line that this graph approaches and never touches. And then if we did that, the y-intercept would be, well, if 1 is our asymptote now, we want the x-axis to be our new asymptote, or 0, where x equals 0, or sorry, y equals 0, then we need to move it down 1, right? So the new y-intercept would be 2, because this graph was translated up 1, so our y-intercept would have been translated up 1 as well, and that's why our new y-intercept would be 2. All right, the y-intercept of the parent exponential growth function, f of x equals b to the power of x, all right, the parent function. Just what factors are we multiplying everything by? What is the original thing that we're looking at? B to the power of x. Well, when you have any b to the power of x, the way to find out the new the y-intercept, or the way to find out where this function would cross the y-axis, when you have something this simple, it's going to be 1. Why? Well, because if I set x as 0, anything to the power of 0 is 1. And if x is 0 right here, boom, now we are at 1 as our y-intercept. Okay? So, the reason that we needed to know this is because if we are translating our function just in general, it's going to cross right here. However, another thing we need to know is that obviously this is being multiplied by something, because if it weren't, the graph would actually cross at 1. And it will look something like this. Okay, so in order to get this to cross the y-axis at 2, we need to multiply it by a factor, right? So, and that would be this factor. How did I get 2? Well, to get from 1 to 2, I need to multiply b by a factor of 2. right? Because if b to the power of x and x is 0 is, if we have b to the power of 0 and that's 1, in order to get it to cross at 2, I need to multiply the entire thing by a factor of 2. So that means that the graph of the parent function is stretched vertically by a factor of 2. And that means that what we are multiplying, the factor we are multiplying b by, happens to also be 2. So k equals 1 and a equals 2. We're almost done. I'm sorry you have to suffer through my stumbles. I'm just like trying to figure out what's the best way to explain this to you. Okay, so I have the terms that I've known right here, the values for those, and now I'm almost ready to write the entire function, the entire equation. I just need to know what the value of b is, okay? X, we don't need to find out because we're gonna plug in the x values. That's how we'll graph this thing. Well, it's already graphed for us, but what we need to know is what are we multiplying b by? What are we adding to it? How are we changing that up in order to graph this function? All right, so what we need to know is that the graph of g of x passes through 1, 7, right? So we're gonna choose 1, 7 here, but just know it could be any point on the line, really. But we're gonna just choose 1, 7 because we know it goes to that point, okay? And we already have, sorry, just to go back really quick. We already have this point, but we want to know like what's the next point that we're looking at. So it goes through 0, 2. Well, what's the next point? What's another point? That way we can, once we graph those 2 points, we can actually graph the line, okay? So we're going to need a couple points there. All right, so the graph of g of x passes through 1, 7. If the graph is translated, as in part A, remember, it's translated up 1, then it passes through 1, 6, because our parent function originally would have passed through 1, 6. Or sorry, not the parent function, the function with the a added to it. Shrinking produces the graph of the parent function passing through 1. Okay, how do we find this? Well, if I know it would pass through 1, 6, and I know that everything was stretched by a factor of 2, well, in order to shrink it, we would have to divide it by 2, right? Because if we're multiplying b by 2 in order to get the points on the line, well, our parent function would pass through 1, 3 because it has not been multiplied by a factor of 2. All right, so the graph of the parent function passes through 1b, so b equals 3. All right, and now we can use all this information to write our equation. If you're getting confused, stop and go back and listen to this because it will make sense as we go through it. All right, so we went through and found k. Then we try to figure out what a was, what factor are we stretching the graph by, and now we're looking at how in the world are we going to get our b. So we started with another point that was not the y-intercept, and knowing that we had stretched it by a factor of 2, we divided this by 2 and got 3, and so now we know that our b is 3. Okay, now given all this information, how do we write this? Remember, it is a times bx plus k. So a, 2 times b to the power of x plus 1. That is your function. That is the equation that you will need to write in order to get that graph up above, okay? So that would give us this graph. So what you need to do, given a graph, figure out what the asymptote is, okay? Use that to help you find your value of k because you know that the asymptote should be the x-axis. If it isn't, did you move up? Did you move down? What did you do? You're gonna have to figure that out in order to find your value of k. Then, knowing that in a function like this where b of x is going to pass through 0, 1, you know that's going to pass through 0, 1. If your y-intercept is not 0, 1 after you translate it back down to its original place, then you just need to know what are you multiplying 1 by in order to get that new y-intercept, okay? It's that simple. Okay, I'm gonna erase everything. If you don't know where we're at, pause, rewind, go back over it, and then we'll look at, we'll reflect on these two questions in a second. Welcome back. So, how did you use the fact that gx passes through 1, 7 to find a point through which the parent function passes? Okay, so g of x passes through 1, 7. Okay, our parent function, sorry, let me put g of x right here. Okay, our parent function passes through 1, comma, 7 minus 1 divided by 2. Okay, it was translated up 1 from the original, so we have to subtract that from our current values from the graph. And then we know that it was multiplied by a factor of 2, so we need to divide it by a factor of 2. And when we do that, we get the line passes through 1, 3, right? 7 minus 1 is 6, divide that by 2, and you get 3. How can you check that you wrote a correct equation? Plug in 1, 4x, and 0, 4x, and see if you get the right coordinates. Then graph. Okay, and then we also always want to check our math when we graph, because sometimes we make a silly mistake and that throws our entire thing off. So that's it. Sorry for the long videos. I know each of these is over 10 minutes. These are kind of complicated. Pause, go back, rewind, do what you need to in order to figure this out. This is actually very simple stuff. It's complicated, but it's not as complicated as it looks. Okay, so good job and good luck.